Welcome to Talking Sense in Rochester. My name's Catherine Richert, and I am Minnesota Public Radio's correspondent based in Rochester, and I'm really, really excited to be doing a Talking Sense event in my hometown tonight. It's so great to see so many students here, but also just a lot of community members whose faces I recognize from being a community member myself. I'm really excited to be hosting tonight's event with the University of Minnesota here in Rochester. I love that we've been able to collaborate on this and sort of bring two parts of our community together. And I also want to say a really big thank you to Bill Doherty, who will be leading tonight's event. He is the co-founder of Braver Angels. Bill and all of their volunteers have been instrumental in the last almost year and a half now in creating Talking Sense and getting it off the ground. You're all here for some really important reasons. You are concerned about the effects of political polarization in our communities. You care about civil discourse, and you're also curious people. You want to understand people who see the world differently than you do. And I think we're off to a great start here if we have all of this in common, right? So this project was really born out of two professional experiences that I've had in my nearly 2 decades of being a reporter. The first was being a politics reporter for a long time and specifically covering disinformation. This was long before the internet was a source of disinformation. I've been doing it for a while. The second thing is covering COVID in the last few years. I was NPR's primary COVID-19 reporter for 2.5 years. And I say this a lot, so if you've heard this spiel before, I apologize, but COVID was a big source of inspiration for me on this project because I was interviewing so many people who would tell me that they had an important relationship dissolve due to differences over the pandemic and just the political climate in which the pandemic was happening in. And as a reporter, I started to wonder, maybe instead of just giving people information, the media needs to do a better job of guiding people in having difficult political conversations, especially in a time when that feels just extremely difficult. So that's exactly what we're going to be practicing here tonight. And in addition to the workshops we are hosting with Braver Angels throughout the state this election year, this is our second one, we've also created online tools to help you think about the challenging conversations that we're having right now in advance. And there's this through line that you will be hearing in our reporting every Tuesday morning on Morning Edition. That's our special time for a Talking Sense story, and perhaps you've heard some of them already. And spoiler alert, Olmsted County will be featured in a piece in a few weeks, so keep your ears open for that. So a few housekeeping items before we get going. We have lots of NPR employees here tonight. They're going to be recording and photographing. If you don't want to be recorded, that's okay. Please just say so. That's all right. And I'm also super excited that we have our Reverb team here. They are wearing t-shirts that say Reverb. Raise your hands, Reverb team. Check them out, they're around. This is a new initiative from NPR that's really focused on serving younger Minnesotans. So I'm looking at all of you, UMR students here. We know that you consume your news in ways that are different from how I consume my news, and I bet a lot of people in this room consume their news. And this is a news source that will center young people's questions and stories. You can find Reverb by following NPR News account or the hashtag ReverbNPR on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube. We're also here to make a social media video with all of you tonight. So is Ann in the room? Ann's right there, she's back there wearing the Reverb shirt. After the event, Ann is going to be in the foyer, and if you're willing to answer this question, we'd love for you to participate. And the question is, what do you wish people understood about your community? It's a really open-ended question by design. It's up to you to define what community means and what you want to talk about. So think about that as we're doing this workshop, and if you want to share at the end, that's wonderful. So now I'm going to hand it off to UMR Chancellor Lori Carroll.
Well, welcome everyone, welcome. I'm so delighted that you've decided to participate tonight, and I'm especially happy to have UMR students here as well. If you're a UMR student, staff, or faculty member, could you just wave your hand? Look at that, all right, UMR students. There's something special about UMR students, many things, but they have one thing in common, and that is they have a burning desire to make a difference in the world and to do that through a career in health. And this community is very fortunate to have these young people in the center, in the heart of their city, learning every day And I'm happy that it's almost finals time. That's not why I'm happy, but it's almost finals time, and our students still chose to participate tonight and to keep learning. And truly, that's what all of us are here for, is it not? As I was thinking about some of the more discouraging things that are happening in the world or that we're anticipating, some of the things that bring us grief and the interdependencies that create conflict and the subject that we're about to experience. I was reminded of a quote from the Once and Future King. So it's King Arthur speaking, but it's T.S. Eliot. And here's a little excerpt of that. The best thing for being sad is to learn something. That is the only thing that never fails. You may grow old and trembling in your anatomies. You may lie awake at night. You may miss your only love. You may see the world about you devastated. There is only one thing for it then, to learn. So thank you all for engaging in this opportunity to learn. Please help me welcome Bill Doherty.
All right, wonderful to see everybody, and there's more food, so get up at any time, and I won't ask how many came for the food, okay? That's not, but I'm delighted to be here. I live in the Twin Cities, and I've made the trek down here a lot, but I've never had to come to downtown where there's road construction, and Waze does not like road construction. Waze kept telling me we had to drive right into the road construction. And then parking. Who would have thought? But I'm here, so happy to be with you. Okay, I'm particularly excited because we have so many students and community members. And the seating so far is mostly students with students and community members with community members. So I'd like to see, and I got permission from the chancellor on this, we brainstormed how to do this. I would like us to figure out together how we could have pairs, whenever possible, of a student and a community member, okay? Because you're going to be doing some work in pairs tonight. Logistically, we're going to have to figure that out together. And I'm going to start you. So in a minute, I'm going to say, stand if you can. And then I'm going to ask the students, maybe more mobile, speaking for myself. So I'm going to ask everybody to stand, and the students to start finding somebody, okay, of another generation. You don't have to ask them how old they are, okay? In fact, Lori said maybe we could go by different decade, and I said it could be 70 and 60, and that's not the same. It's not the same. And so I'm asking everybody, you willing to work with me on this? It means you're comfortable in your seat next to your buddy you came with, and you're going to say goodbye to your buddy, okay? But we don't have even numbers, so some of the community members will be with the fellow community member. But I'd like every student, if possible, you with me, to find a community member. It's going to be a little bit of chaos here for a couple minutes, and use all your social skills to introduce yourself briefly, okay? And then sit down. You ready? Everybody stand if you can. Spread out. Find somebody. Okay, please sit down again. Okay. Shh. So please find a seat. If you did not find their pair, that's fine too. We don't have even numbers, but I appreciate everybody's cooperation with that. All right. I wasn't sure how that was going to go, but it seemed to go okay. Okay, you all have a handout. Okay, this is the old-fashioned, it's not a PowerPoint, this is actually called a handout. And it's made with this stuff like this and has ink on it. So I'm an old-fashioned teacher in that regard. Okay, So this is a workshop on skills for disagreeing better. So we're going to be talking about skills, and we'll have some policy things as examples that you can practice the skills with. So if you follow me on page 1, the goals are that you have more understanding of the values and concerns of people who differ from you politically, and there's going to be a little exercise on that. And that you have better skills for listening in a way that the other person feels heard, and that you have better skills for sharing your perspective in a way that the other person might hear, even if they disagree. So those are the goals. A couple of ground rules. We're here to talk about skills, not policies, so we're going to be using some examples of policies, but when you practice, you're going to be practicing using the skills rather than discussing the policy. We have other workshops where we talk about policy. And let's help each other out. It's not a competition. So if I give you some directions for the practice and the other person kind of is confused, just help them, a little buddy system here, help them out, okay? And so I always like to talk about some expectations to abandon. So we talked about the goals, but expectations to abandon if you practice the skills we're talking about. And the first one to abandon is the idea that you will persuade other people they're wrong and you're right about issues of importance to them. Abandon the notion that if you really use your skills, they will go, what was I thinking all these years? I was completely wrong, and now since you have used these Braver Angel skills, my goodness, I'm going to change my mind. Instead, what you hope is that they will see you as somewhat reasonable and at least willing to listen. So in Braver Angels, we talk about we're not interested in changing people's minds about issues. We're interested in them changing their mind about each other. Okay, so abandon the idea that it's only successful if the other person changes their mind. If you've made a connection, if you have listened respectfully, maybe they'll listen to you. And then the second one is to abandon the expectation that people you talk with will use the skills that we have in this workshop. Just because you went to a skills training doesn't mean they have to change how they talk, okay? And so it means that you may have to do more of the heavy lifting. If you are in a conversation with somebody who's used to just back and forth, you say this, I say that, and you slow it down and you listen and acknowledge what they're saying, that may be a new experience for them, and at least temporarily they may not exchange the favor. And it's important to just accept that, to accept the fact that you may be using more of the skills, at least at the beginning, that the others do. Okay, so we have 4 skills we're going to talk about. Listen, acknowledge, pivot, and I'll describe what that is, and offer perspective. And since I was the one that developed this workshop, I can name them whatever I want. And I named them for David Lapp, who is one of the co-founders of Brave Angels. So we call these affectionately the Lapp skills. There's another workshop I do in relationships that my wife is named Leah. I named the skills Leah. So I can do whatever I want in naming them. So the Lapp skills. And so the first one then is to listen carefully. What does that mean? It means turning off my inner debater and not prepare a response while they're talking. That is really hard. That is really hard, to not be preparing my rebuttal. Listening for the weakest part of their argument, right? Instead, listen to them, be present to them, okay? Be ready to summarize what they've said. Be ready to summarize, to acknowledge feedback, what they said. And what's the advantage of listening to be able to summarize? So somebody just call out. What's the advantage of listening so that you could summarize? What's the advantage? Yeah, they feel heard, right? And so so one of the skills is going to be to acknowledge, but you have to listen first so that you could summarize. And then focus on their viewpoint and also, if you can, their underlying values and concerns. Behind every passionate political belief is a story. And the story is about concerns and values and things that are important. And if you can listen not just to, I'm against this or I'm for this, but if there's some passion and energy there, what are the values, what are the concerns? And we're going to do a little exercise about learning some of the values and concerns of conservatives and liberals. And then the last one is to look for something you can agree with. So as you're listening for where they're coming from, what they're saying, what might be under it, and something you can lock in on that you agree with. And that the agreement skill will be one of the most important ones we talk about here. Because if you listen to me well and find something to agree with me on, I think you're a pretty smart person. Okay, and we now are in a conversation. Okay, so we have this exercise we're going to do next, page 2 and 3, of listening for values and concerns underneath policy differences. And what we have is a list of core values and concerns summarized of conservatives and core values and concerns of liberals. Now, these are not exhaustive, and not every conservative or every liberal would phrase all these the same way. But in Braver Angels, and we're a national nonprofit with a lot of folks in Minnesota, and our leadership is always what we call half red, half blue. Red meaning leaning conservative, tending to vote for Republicans more than Democrats. Blue meaning leaning liberal, tending to vote more often for Democrats. And so when we develop everything, including these workshops, we have co-developed this list of values and concerns. And so what we're going to do is an exercise in which we're going to, and Melinda, I forgot to ask you to read the liberal ones. I asked Tim to read the conservative ones. Are you okay with that? Sure, okay. So we're going to have Tim come up and read the conservatives. Yeah, and Tim is a red, and he's going to be speaking to us later.
All right, this is a conservative prompt on policing. So.
No. Actually, you're reading the actual values, not the policing thing. That's later.
Just trying to jump ahead.
Oh, it's hard to work with reds.
I think it was the coffee, but start with.
You're reading those. Yeah.
Okay, so core values: individual freedom and personal responsibility, free market capitalism as an engine of human progress, patriotism, enthusiastic love of the country, social values of religion, family, and respect for tradition, and local initiative and local charity.
Keep going.
For core concerns, grouping people into identity categories that compromise their individuality. Another core concern is government expansion, such as overregulation and excessive taxation that limits the freedom of individuals and businesses to make their own choices. Skepticism about the ability of government to manage complex programs. Suspicion of utopian promises and caution about social engineering as coming with many unintended consequences. And finally, being immediately labeled with an ism or a phobia when expressing views on public policy and cultural issues. Note, these values and concerns vary among libertarians, social conservatives, populist, and free enterprise conservatives.
Thank you. A little applause here for that. Okay. And then Melinda, who is also one of our Brave Rangers leaders, who is a blue.
Yes.
And you'll need the mic.
I will. Core values, liberal values and concerns. Core values: inclusiveness, especially for those on the margins; diversity, the value of human differences; a level playing field for people who have been denied opportunities; an active government to help those in need and ensure fairness; safe social environments, which include attention to language. core concerns. Abuses of free market capitalism that lead to exploitation and inequality, ignoring historical forces of injustice that are still present, patriotism that is not balanced with criticism, groups who are left out of social progress, being immediately labeled with terms such as woke and big government liberal when presenting views on public policy and cultural issues. Note that these values and concerns vary between left-wing progressives and moderate liberals.
Okay, thank you. A little applause there. Okay, thank you. So this is going to be our first activity. I'd like you to look at the core values and core concerns of the political side that is the furthest from yours. Many of you, when you logged in, you were red or blue, some were neither. But take one of those that is perhaps a little is further from your own. So we're looking for difference here. And ask yourself, how might your understanding of those values and concerns help you listen better to somebody who you disagree with about policy? How might understanding what's beneath the policy differences, how might that help you listen more deeply? That's going to be the activity here. And it might be helpful for you to take some issue that you care a lot about, and then ask yourself, okay, as I think about this issue, and I may have trouble understanding why people differ from me on that policy, take a look at these core values and concerns and ask yourself, how might I be able to listen better or understand more if I take into account some of those values and concerns? And so I see some of you nodding and some of you looking at like, what's he talking about? So this is not an easy exercise because we're inviting you to role take a perspective that may be different from yours and to not critique it, but to try to take it in. It would be like if you were a religious person of a particular religious faith and you're going to be learning about a different religious tradition and what its core values are. And so the way to do that is not to say, well, that's not right and that's not right and blah, 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 but to say, okay, these are genuinely believed and felt differences from me, and I want to understand them, and this may help me understand this other person, even if we don't agree. And then applying it here around politics, it can be helpful to take a specific issue you care about and then run that through these values and concerns of the other side. And again, I'll repeat again that for this exercise, you have to suspend your inner critic. Suspend the part of you that says, well, the first one contradicts the fourth one, because the other person will do that back. You know, there's tensions among all these values. There's contradictions, on everybody's side. So try to offer a little grace to the other side for the purpose of the exercise, okay? So what I'm going to have you do is take a moment to look through the core concerns, core values of a side that is furthest from your own. If you're completely down the middle, just pick one. And ask yourself, how might understanding these help me listen more deeply to people who disagree with me? And so we're going to take a minute for you to do that study, and then I'm going to ask you to pair up with your new best friend here that you met, and for several minutes to answer the question. Okay? Are there any questions about the exercise we're going to do, what I'm asking you to do? Feel free to raise your hand and ask for clarification. Yeah.
Could we determine which side we're on before?
No. So can you determine? No, we didn't pair you up by red or blue. So just.
No, but I mean, can we ask what?
Can you ask? No, just let them say what they want to say. Yeah, you don't say, are you a red or blue or purple or whatever, right? You a left-winger or a populist, or what are you? So good question, but no, just let them just express whatever they want to express. Okay, so we're going to begin a moment of silent reflection, which we can do in this big building here. And then at the end of that, I'm going to ask you to pair up for the discussion. And in the discussion, you're not trying to convince anybody of anything. You're just giving them a chance to talk about how focusing on these values and concerns might help them listen more deeply. So take a moment of reflection. Okay, so when I say go, you're going to pair up for 4 minutes. Don't leave some poor third person alone at the end of the aisle, however, okay? But basically, you're pairs. Okay, you ready? Go. All right, ding, 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 ding. Shh. Thank you. Shh. All right. Back up here. Shh. If you're like me, I want to get my last profound point in after they call time. All right, so thank you for getting into that. So I'd like to hear from some folks who would like to share with the whole group something that you took from this exercise that might be useful for you in listening more deeply. And so we have a couple mics running around so that everybody can hear you. So who would like to? Now we go from the intimacy of the small group. But if some of you, like me, think other people are dying to hear what I think of stuff. So anyway, so who would like to go first? Go for it. Thank you. If you could stand so people could see, that'd be great.
I have a mic.
Yeah. I have a mic.
And I spilled
So
my
we
wine.
have a genuine extrovert in the group.
Okay, well, one thing I brought up was you always seem to know more about your opinions and your side, and so one thing that I thought was really cool is having all of these concerns and values laid out for both sides was really eye-opening, because then I could be like, oh, I know examples of this, or oh, I have those own values, and then I can see that in both myself and then the people around me, and will help me when I interact with other people.
Right.
So I know not just more about myself, I'm more educated with everyone's opinions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, appreciate that. How about a little applause for everybody who's brave enough to speak, okay? Even if they're extrovert and say, I have a mic, okay? For a lot of people, the shy people say, I have a mic? Okay, so who'd like to go next?
What's interesting as we did the learning part is that we discovered, I selected from the liberal list, the concern there, and also she selected from the conservative list. As we talk more about it, it turns out there's a value that we both share. That is, if it's go to extreme, if there's a concern. Mm-hmm. For example, the whole notion about creating a safe space, my concern had always been, even though I'm leaning liberal, concerning about being a safe space is too protective. You're not able to develop a skill to combat the real world if you go too much to the extent. And then from my partner's perspective is government regulation too over, which is really a conservative part. So really, again, it's really a sense of if you over-protection, over-regulate, that could be, that's a common value, actually.
Okay, so it was very interesting because you talked about at the level of sort of moderation on some of the values, you found common ground. Your concern was about them taken to an extreme, but there was a commonality around the core value. So thank you. Yes, so I saw another hand over here.
Hi. My partner we talked about some of the core values, and then I mentioned just one topic, like gun control, and how the core values fit into that, which exposed from her a whole different background. I mean, it's eye-opening kind of thing. So that was fascinating.
Yeah. So you took an issue and boom,
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. one or two more, what you took from this? We have somebody.
So I'm assuming that most people were like in a cross-generational pairing like we were. So aha moment. I can leave right now and I've learned enough that I think I can digest this for the next week.
Oh, please, I have a lot more to
I'm
say,
sure you do.
really.
So
Yeah.
Vish and I were doing our core value thing, and then at some point I gave an example of having lived in China and in the 90s and et cetera. And then so Vish asks me, how was China? And then he tells me, he is a third my age. He's a college freshman. That makes me exactly 3 times older than you, by the way. And he says that in his world, in his life, and the media he's consumed and the messages he gets, all he hears is negative things about China. And so, but I think back to the 90s, before I even went to China the first time, late 80s, early 90s, and I think about the media, the news, the things I consumed, the messages I got about the country that New York Times just today, an article I read, said is our greatest modern adversary. And so when you're doing cross-cultural conversation, cross-generational conversations, where people are getting their information and what they've been exposed to is really important, because he and I both agree it's a beautiful country full of wonderful people and we'd want to go there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so a common value of wanting to care about and respect the people there, but when you came of age, but that's a very interesting take on all of these values in some ways, right? When we started to pay attention, what was the incoming at a certain point in our lives? Because there's some research showing that most people kind of solidify a political philosophy somewhere in their late teens into their 20s. And so that's going to be pretty powerful. So that's a very interesting conversation. Was there one more? Yeah, go for it.
So my partner and I, we both agreed with the free market choice in when it comes to the economy, but I took more sided with a liberal stance in the free market society in inclusiveness for people like with disabilities, you know, and all that stuff. So I kind of had more of a center-left position than my partner, but we both agreed with the free market that we don't want to be like completely taken over by the government or completely taken over by the free market.
Interesting. Okay, so thanks to everybody. Everyone should applaud everybody who was willing to share here. Thank you. Very, very interesting. Okay, I appreciate you going with me on that exercise. It's kind of a countercultural thing to actually try to do an appreciative understanding of a political philosophy that's different from one's own. And so now we're going to get into some behavioral skills, and one of those is acknowledgement. And so we're on page 3. And so acknowledge is the skill of letting the other person know that you've heard them by the words you share. So most political conversations go this way. So Naomi, I say up, you say down. I say left, you say, I say hot, you say cold, boom, 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 boom. Trump is no good, he's great. Biden is too old, he's fine. Boom, 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 right? Just counter each other. Dueling opinions that then eventually can get personal because it duels enough, and I'm suggesting that you don't know what you're talking about because you don't agree with me, because of course I know what I'm talking about. And so a way to interrupt that is to acknowledge what the other person said before you give your own viewpoint. The principal skill in communicating in the presence of disagreement is to connect first before you share your disagreement. To connect first. Some version of, I hear you on, I get this is important to you. Connect before you share. Why is it important? So just, you don't have to use the mic on this. What's the advantage of connecting? Connecting would be, okay, I hear that hot is important to you. Okay, left is important to you. Simple thing like that. What's the advantage of that in communication across differences? What's the advantage?
You've shown that you're open-minded and hearing their opinion.
Yeah, in fact, he said they come across open-minded because that's right. If I slow down and acknowledge what you've said without immediately, arguing against it, I come across open-minded, which means you're more likely to want to go on in the conversation. So it is the key skill. And in fact, it's so key. If you find yourself in an up back and forth argument, let me go back and try to acknowledge what they said. Let me go back and say, okay, let me see if I understand why. What did I say? Were you hot or cold? Which one were you? You're hot. Okay, I'm hot. I keep forgetting. So if we're in an argument about that, I'm like, so tell me why cold. No, hot. Cold. See, I forgot already. This is the advantage of having a young person. She actually remembers the conversation. So tell me why cold is important to you. Okay? And we now have a connection. And then later on, when I say why hot is important to me, she's much more likely to listen to me. It's like a fundamental norm of human communication that if somebody is kind and listens to us, we are more likely to be kind and listen to them. So how do you do this? So here's some examples. I hear you on climate change. This is a red and blue example. I hear you climate change. You don't want the federal government regulating the economy over a threat that might not materialize. Or you believe we're running out of time on climate change and we have to take strong measures now. Okay, so I just gave an example of a blue saying to a red, you're concerned about overregulation and it's not proven yet, and then the other saying, you're saying we're running out of time and we have to take action. The power of feeding back to somebody what they said in a neutral way, not in a snarly way, so you don't want the government overregulating, right? But not in a snarly way, communicates respect for them and that they are worthy of being in a conversation with me, okay? And they're going to be much more open to it, I have to say. So another one, if I understand you right, you're saying that we should eliminate access to certain kinds of guns to prevent mass shootings. Or I get that you have strong feelings about DEI programs causing harm. So again, if you may feel like a lot of the attacks on the DEI programs are terrible, or you may think they're justified, but if you can say, I hear you that you're very concerned about programs causing harm, if that's what you're saying, and I acknowledge it without immediately disagreeing with it, we have connected. We have connected, okay? And you're more apt, if I have a different opinion than you, you're more apt to listen to me later. So you can also ask a clarifying question if you're not getting what they're saying. And so an example would be, somebody may think, this is the issue of elections being stolen or fair. So are you referring to the last election, presidential election, which election are you referring to if I'm confused, okay? So if you're confused about what they're saying, you can ask a clarifying question, but don't ask some big, so what evidence do you have, Mark, for your viewpoint on that? That is not a clarifying acknowledgement thing. It is, that's what we call the classic gotcha. And then I'm prepared to refute your evidence afterwards. And you can also do a brief agreement. Like you can nod and say, yeah, I'm with you on that. If somebody says something that you agree with. But an acknowledgement, you want to hand it back to them. You don't want to go on and on about how much you agree with what they just said and thereby take the conversational wall away from them. Have you ever had that in a conversation? You offer something and then somebody just, boom, they just take it. But you could be nodding and say, yeah, I hear you on that and it makes sense to me. Okay, this is all part of acknowledging. Okay, so now we're going to do an exercise on this, and we're going to use the example of policing and public safety, and we're going to have a conservative viewpoint, a conservative, what we call prompt on policing, and a liberal prompt on policing. And I'm going to ask you to, I'm going to have my readers do this again. Melinda, you still around? And Tim? Is Melinda still around? Okay, lost her. So what we're going to do is, Tim will read the conservative one, I'll read the liberal one. And so I'd like you to listen and read, and then I'm going to be asking you to compose an acknowledgement for the viewpoint that is furthest from your own. Okay? So as you listen to these, ask yourself which of these two positions is further from your own. And then I'm going to ask you to actually write down an acknowledgement statement. Some paraphrase, some summary, something you heard from them about what they said and maybe some feeling or that they had behind it. So that's where we're going. And so we're going to start with the conservative prompt on policing. Yep.
All right, now listen, I think too many liberals are ignoring the problem of rising crime in this community. It's getting scary to live here. I hear too much defund the police and other anti-police rhetoric. I know there are some bad apples in law enforcement, but by and by, our officers are doing a good job. And it's demoralizing for them when civic leaders and regular citizens don't support them. I want our city to do the right thing by expanding the law enforcement presence. I know officers can't solve every problem, but they are our first line of defense and deserve our full support.
Acting there, and now we have our blue come up here, all right? And we are not going to test the applause meter scale at the end, by there, just acknowledging the people. Go for it.
You conservatives seem to think that throwing more money into law enforcement is going to solve the crime problem. Crime comes from poverty and discrimination and has to be solved by addressing these problems. Communities of color in particular don't trust the police, and for good reason. Instead of increasing the police budget, I support funding for social workers who can respond to mental health 911 calls rather than armed officers showing up. And we need to support community agencies that can get to root causes of crime. Let's stop overemphasizing law enforcement and take a broader view of how to improve public safety.
Okay, Melinda, all right. Give her. Okay, so they're deliberately done strongly, okay? And I think they represent two different viewpoints. So your assignment now is to write down, and if anybody doesn't have a writing utensil, we have some extras. I realize younger generation, you can also do it on your iPhone, by the way. I discovered that recently. Somebody at a workshop, I said, do you need a piece? No, I was just talking, oh, wow, look at that. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? So I'd like you to look at the prompt that is furthest from your own and write an acknowledgement. So look at what we said about acknowledgement. It's a paraphrase. It's letting them know what you heard. And feel free to say what you got was the intensity behind what they said, the concern. And nothing of your own view. Only acknowledge what you heard. You got it? Go. Okay, so when I say go back into your groups, not yet, and take turns reading what you wrote and what was your thinking as you wrote it, and then just discuss that for a couple minutes. But don't get into the issue of policing. Again, we're not here to debate the issue, but the use of the skill. So just read it to each other, say why you did what you did, and just compare notes about the skill. You ready? Go. Okay, Thank you. Shh. Okay. Hey, you're a really good group of getting quiet at the end. That's really, I appreciate that. Maybe it's because of the loud mic, but I appreciate that. Okay, so who would be willing to read off your acknowledgement statement so we can hear some from the group? So who would like to do that? Okay, go for it. If you could stand up, that'd be great.
All right, so my response is to a conservative prompt, and all I said was just, I completely understand your concern. No one wants to feel unsafe or scared in a place they're supposed to call home.
Okay, beautiful, beautiful. So lovely. And that had some, that got to a core concern, right? And it validated, okay? And so they would feel like, hey, she gets what I'm saying. And you weren't just parroting back. And so a real acknowledgement doesn't just use the same words. You know, you say cold and I say you like cold, you know. So you kind of put it into your own words. So thank you for that. Who else would like that? They don't all have to be that good, by the way. Mediocrity is just fine. Go for it.
So mine is in response to the conservative prompt as well. I said, I agree that losing the support of the public can feel demoralizing for police officers, and that officers do provide a valuable first line of defense.
Okay, so thank you for that. Now, what you did was you did the agree one. And so we're going to do that a little bit later. There was an acknowledgement in there, but you skipped ahead. Smarty. No more students, Lori, no more. Only call on old people. Oh, no.
Wow. Before I give my response, Bill, I wanted to add there's a phrase, I guess, that I live my life by and my career by, that people don't care what you know until they know that you care.
Yeah.
And that really fit with me in this section, that I think what we're trying to do is show that we care and we're human, and then we can get into the debate on where we disagree later, but that connection.
Thank you, yes. Now do this well.
Okay, I hope so.
After that sermon, you better do a good job here.
So I did the liberal prompt. I realize that we need to address the root causes of crime, and that some of those reasons are poverty and discrimination. And I imagine, I share your concern about mental health, and imagine if that was an issue in my family, that I would want some type of other response other than law enforcement.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for that as well. Now, if you're channeling my feedback earlier, that was what? That was a really strong agreement statement. And I'm just, for the purposes of this, it was beautiful, of course, but for the purposes of this exercise, I'm wanting you not to say whether you agree or not. Okay, because sometimes there's very little you agree on, and you have to be able to acknowledge you're talking to somebody who believes in the flat earth, and you have to be able to acknowledge even when you don't agree. So I just want to just make that distinction between this is what I'm hearing you say, and then, because what we're going to talk about is that a full-out agreement can come in when you're sharing your perspective. So one more, we'll do one more. Thank you for these. These are good connecting statements everybody's doing. Anybody want to try one more? You go for it.
I responded to the conservative prompt, and I said, I totally hear your concerns about how the negativity towards police, who are often doing a thankless job, is not helping our community be safer.
Okay. So thank you. And that's, again, connecting. It's also a perspective statement. Okay, so this is part of the teaching thing. So what I'm going to be talking about in a moment is how you can share your perspective. And when you share your perspective, you can fold an agreement in there. But a pure acknowledgement, you're not elaborating on your perspective. You're just summarizing back what they have said. You with me on that? So it's, in real life, all of those are going to go over well, but for the purposes of the learning of the exercise, it's important to distinguish that if you're pure acknowledgement, you're not doing much with I statements. You are getting with them about what they have said. Okay, so thank you for all this. Okay, so the next skill is pivot. And pivot is one that we kind of invented, I think, in Brave Angels. Maybe it's out there in the real world. But in politics, a lot of times somebody you're talking to has a head of steam up, okay? And you've acknowledged that, that they are very concerned about root causes of crime. And you acknowledge that, okay? So I hear you really want to, you think that policing is not the answer to the serious crime, that we need to get at root causes. No, I just acknowledge that. And then suppose, I'll just do Mark here, suppose then Mark just keeps going, like, let me give you more about that, because his introductory statement he held back. And so he's on a roll about root causes. It can be helpful to do what we call a pivot, which is basically asking, is it okay if I share my view? No. Thank you, Mark. Because sometimes people will signal you they do not want to hear you, right? They just keep going. In which case, you can just do two things. You can go back and acknowledge some more, because Mark needs to be heard more before he's willing to listen to me. Or I can say, hey, I'm glad we had the conversation, and exit, okay? But the pivot is a way to see if the road is clear for you to take your turn. So a pivot signals that you're about to offer your viewpoint. So an example, can I offer my thoughts on this? Or, this is something, so, I'm hearing you on the root causes, and it's something I've thought a lot about. That what I'm looking for, what he's doing now, he's nodding, okay? That's my nonverbal signal that he's willing to pass the ball to me. And then I'm going to go into my own statement. So you don't have to use it all the time, but it can be a powerful tool, particularly when somebody has a head of steam up, okay? And you've listened to them and you're getting permission. When you pivot, you're not yet offering your perspective yet. You're just saying, I have some thoughts about this, or can I share my viewpoint? One of the things I do with, by the way, extended families are some of the last bastions of political diversity in the country, because you don't get to decide who your in-laws are. So I have extended family all over the country. And one of the things I like to do is go up to somebody and say, what are people in your part of the country saying about such and such? And then they tell me, and then maybe they go on at some point, and then I might say, yeah, so around here, I don't know if there's some conversations around here too, and then I'm looking for, tell me. If what I get, some of my relatives, because you have them, if what I get is, well then, I don't share my view. I don't share the view, because there's no openness to it at the moment. So the pivot can keep you from a fruitless argument with somebody who's not showing the least bit of interest in hearing what you're having to say. So you just feel free to put it into your repertoire. And sometimes, if you notice, very skilled communicators. I was talking to a school superintendent who's very skilled, and some parents, really come on strong. And then he will say, I'm hearing what you're saying, and I get that, and would you like to hear my thoughts about this? People will almost always say yes. Not always, but they'll almost always say yes. And then the floor is yours. Okay, so we're not going to practice that one. We're going to go to the last one, and we'll do a practice on it. So next one is page 5. And so this is the perspective skill. So when you have connected with somebody, when you have acknowledged what they've said, and the road looks like it's clear for you to talk, then these are the skills for sharing your perspective. So the two large skills are the listening skills, which is listen for not only their position, but their values and their concerns. And then acknowledge what you've heard before you give your viewpoint. If it's useful, pivot. And then share your viewpoint after you've sort of cleared the way. And so some elements of these, and by the way, Braver Angels did not invent any of this. These are the skills that are out there all over the place. Many of you students are learning these right now. In my day, we learned none of these in school, but I realize that you are learning these. So I just want to acknowledge that. But I also want to say that they can be hard to implement around political differences because these differences have gotten so powerful, and they often relate to issues of identity and fear and a place in this country. And so it's hard. It's hard. In fact, a workshop, one of the first skills workshops I ever did with Braver Angels, there was a group of therapists in the room, and I'm a therapist, and they happened to come to this. And at the end of the workshop, I asked, what are you taking with you? And a therapist said, well, I know all these skills, but I never thought to apply them to political conversations. Okay? And then an interfaith minister got up and said the same thing. I mean, these skills are the core of interfaith dialogue, but he gave himself permission to abandon them when it comes to talking about political differences or some politician you hate. It was a very humble and interesting thing to say. So I'm not suggesting that the skills themselves are brand new, like you never heard them before, but it's the intentionality and the self-discipline to use them, particularly if somebody says something that activates me. So take a breath, not just come right back at them, but to acknowledge and try to understand what they're saying. So these are the core elements of perspective. I statements rather than truth statements. So if acknowledgement is the key listening skill, I statements are the key expressive skill, the key perspective sharing skill. This is how I see it. This is how I came to see it. This is why I see it this way, as opposed to it, this is how it absolutely is. And if you want to see this played out now, our national discussion about elections and trustworthy elections. So again, I'll go to Mark, and you're saying these elections are not fair, and I think there's been a lot of fraud, and I don't trust. And then if I just say, well, they are fair. The courts have adjudicated it. Have you ever heard that one? And then he tells me why he holds his view. And then I just I'm trying to say the sun comes up in the east, Mark. Okay, west. He said west. Okay, well, let's dialogue about that. So fact statements around political differences rarely help. Okay, because there's values involved, there's who we trust. In fact, policy-relevant facts are something that very few of us have any direct access to. If you're not a climate scientist, you don't have direct access to knowledge about what kind of trouble we're in about climate and how fast we should be doing something. It's who do you trust? Who are the sources of you trust about climate? And we nowadays trust different sources. And so it does no good to make truth statements when we trust different sources of truth. Okay, so this is what I believe, and this is how I see it. And what are my sources for this? Okay, what are my sources? And it doesn't mean I have namby-pamby about this. I can be very strong. I can have very strong convictions, and then cite how I came to my convictions. Okay, what sources I've used. They may be personal stories, they may be friends, they may be academic sources, they may be media. How did I come to my view on, we'll keep going the election. How did I come to my view on this? Okay, and invites you to say how you came to your view on this, as opposed to I am in possession of the truth and the facts, and I'm going to deliver them to you. So that all comes from saying I. Okay, and you hear me, it's not that you are namby-pamby about it. You can be strong, but I rather than this is absolutely the way it is. So some examples. I'm basing my view on data about the risk of suicide from guns in the home, which, as I understand it, is a bigger risk to life than stranger attacks. Or my reading has convinced me that gun ownership is deeply rooted in the U.S. Constitution. There'd be examples of either of those. The next one is to share a life experience or personal story behind your viewpoint. Remember I said that behind strong political viewpoints, there's usually a story. There's usually a story. Feel free to share your story, how you came to this. I remember we do what we call red-blue workshops in Brave Angels, and I remember a powerful group discussion around affirmative action where two people told their stories. And it was, a red and blue, they told stories that were very influential and very powerful. I don't have time to get into the specifics of it, but they grounded it. They grounded it, as opposed to some sort of more philosophical discussion. Try to mention something you agree with. So that was why earlier on, and all of the acknowledgement statements are really good. I'm suggesting fold agreement into the sharing of your perspective. Okay, so this is when I share my view, so we may be talking about the elections, and you may be saying they have to be safeguarded and blah, blah, blah. And then I may say, I completely agree, we need fair elections, we need to have trusted elections, we need to make sure that there is no fraud, okay? Now, he and I might differ about the extent to which we think a particular election was stolen, but we're connecting on they have to be free and fair and accessible, okay? So we have bonded on something here, even though we differ on some others. So always in your perspective, try, as you've listened for a value, so if you're, say, a blue listening to a red talk of, you know about overregulation, which is a big concern among reds, if you're smart, if you're proposing a regulation, you're gonna say, and here's why I think it's a necessary one. Like you, I don't want overregulation. But here I think this one is useful for the following reason, okay? That would be an example of that. The last one, avoid negative labels. Don't do the ism words if you want to keep somebody in a conversation with you. Don't label what they're saying, calling them out. There's a wonderful expression of calling in instead of out, okay? So avoid labels and avoid generalizations. All you Democrats, all you Republicans, all you liberals, all you conservatives, just shuts down the conversation. Okay, so this will be our last practice. So I'd like you to go back to the prompts, the conservative prompt on policing, the liberal prompt on policing, and I would like you to take the one that you disagree with or that's farthest from your view, and I'd like you to compose a perspective statement. I'd like you now to share your view using the I messages, mentioning your sources, trying to find something you agree with. Now, rather than write it out word for word, it's okay to just bullet point it, okay? Your perspective, you're now in a conversation with somebody who said the prompt you most disagree with. And you have listened to them, you've pivoted, and they've said they're willing to hear. And now you're going to share your perspective. I statements, something to agree with, okay? Something about your sources, if that's useful. So what I'd like you to do now, take your pen out again, and compose your perspective in response to what the other person has said. You with me on that? Your perspective, and feel free to bullet point it, because we don't have enough time for you to write out a whole paragraph. So go for it. Take a minute for that. Okay, 3 minutes. Back in your pairs. Go. Okay. Shh. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Shh. All right. So who would like to share your perspective statement? This is where you get the world to hear exactly what you think of this issue. So who'd like to go? Was that, you're pointing to somebody? Oh, so Rachel has volunteered somebody for it. So Rachel, I could turn that back on you and make you go. She really did a good job. Okay, now she's standing up. Okay.
I went with the liberal one, so I said that the way I see it, having social workers show up to mental health calls is better. In my experience, we had to make a call for my stepsister, and when a cop showed up and was armed, it almost made her feel more scared to get help. But I do understand how having a cop show up could be good for a situation.
Wow. Yeah. Rachel, you're lucky she came through. Okay. Yes, you are. You knew. Okay. So, but you notice the story was in there. It was there was a story. And then there was the balance. It was, but I understand there's something in the other side too, right? So it wasn't just, because if you didn't add the last part of your agreement, the other person would say, but there's sometimes, right? And so you headed that off by acknowledging your agreement with that perspective rather than you stand on this side, social workers, blah, 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 and then they stand on the other side. Well, sometimes you need somebody who's armed because you're saying you believe that both are true, although you lean one way, okay? And so when you share it, you're sharing a lean rather than you're on that side of the fence and I'm on this side. So nice job. Somebody else like to share their perspective. Again, it doesn't have to be that good. It can be just above average. So we'll have a Minnesota perspective here. And students are smarter, too, so that's the other thing. So feel free. They are, somebody says, yeah. So who'd like to go next?
I did the conservative prompt, and what I have to say to it is there's a few areas in the prompt where it says that they're doing a good job and that they deserve our full support. Mm-hmm. And what I had to say to that was it's okay. Even if something was wrong, you can say that the entirety of it is doing a good job, but you still need to hold things accountable for when things go wrong. Mm-hmm. And there was another part where they said that they should still expand the law enforcement presence. And to that, I said that if there's a problem, you don't need to necessarily downsize it, but if you don't need to downsize it, then that definitely means you shouldn't expand it. And my partner, Pam, put it into an analogy of a Boeing airplane where they found a problem. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't keep pushing it down the assembly line. You need to take it back, look at what's wrong, fix the problem, and go from there.
Good, thank you. So yes, nicely nuanced. And so what's happening in both of those, you conceded a point. I mean, you went to the other person, and because you're not portraying them as completely unreasonable, and then you made your point, and that way, kind of a subtle point about expansion versus cutting, right? And then getting the problem solved before you expand. So thoughtful, both of those are thoughtful. Somebody else? Yeah.
So I went with the liberal prompt this time.
Where?
And,
okay, thank you. Yes, I was looking at this gentleman, I heard the voice from over there, okay.
So I went with the liberal prompt this time, and it was, instead of increasing the police budget, I support funding for social workers who can respond to mental health, for 911 calls, and so on and so forth. Well, I disagreed with the increasing the police budget, but because, and here's my viewpoint, is if somebody is in a mental health crisis, and they're paired with a police officer who does not know how to deal with mental health, the police department should hire social workers to partner with a police officer who doesn't know how to deal with a mental health call. And then the police officer is there as to provide protection if that individual's mental health condition gets to be physical towards themselves. Then there can be both a caseworker and the police officer to work together.
Yeah.
And so...
so thank you.
Yeah.
So a kind of a reasoned approach to it. Speaking in a calm voice, you didn't sound like you were fighting somebody on that. And by the way, I do work with police, and so they all agree with you. I mean, in fact, I'm a little off topic here, but the police know that they're not trained. for these sorts of things. So that's neither a red nor blue issue. It's really, it's one that almost everybody agrees. So last one.
I was in response to the conservative prompt, and I was kind of talking about my personal experience. I said that I grew up a block away from where Dante Wright was killed in Brooklyn Center, and I saw how that directly impacted my community.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And so sometimes that's all you have to do is tell a story, and if the other person is interested, they'll stay with you on it. Now, sometimes they're not. I don't want to portray that everybody is always a great dialogue partner. And if somebody were to communicate no interest in what more you had to say, that's okay. You just sort of back away from the conversation because it's a vulnerable thing you're about to share, right? And you don't have to share it unless you feel like the person is wanting to hear it. But that would be an opening story, and then you see what the atmosphere is. So one last one. Yes, go for it.
A comment. Our wonderful county commissioners here did do both. They funded the police and they built a team of social workers to go out with them.
So a little credit to our county commissioners who are here. All right, it's okay. Okay, very, very nice, very nice. Okay, so we're going to be wrapping up, and the first part of the wrap-up will be Tim is going to talk about some things that are coming up here locally.
All right, thank you, Bill. Okay, so this was just a start of listening and agreeing, acknowledging. We want to continue the conversation. So next Tuesday at the library, just a few blocks from here, 6 to 7 o'clock, come over, bring your friends. It doesn't matter if they took this class or not. And we're going to practice the different skills and come up with strategies that we can share with each other. So if you're a student at the University of Minnesota, and I'm an alumni, you can really appreciate the small classes and the collaboration that you get here. I got a degree in instructional design, and it was the medical terminology and the anatomy class that got me a job at Cardinal Health. And my job was to assist the salesperson to go out, and when I started, I was just brimming, oh man, I can tell them about adult learning theory and performance objectives, and my sales manager, when he walked in the door, said, Tim, you are not to say a word. So I sat there for 90 minutes contemplating strategies on how to listen. And I'll share those with you next week, Tuesday, and listen for yours too.
Thank you. A little applause for our alum here. Okay. What I'd like to do in wrapping up is I'd like you to ask yourself this question. What's something that you're taking with you from our time here that you want to try to implement? Okay, could be one thing, it could be a couple, but something from our time here that you would like to try to use in your everyday life around disagreeing better about politics. So take 30 seconds for that, and then at the end of that, I'm going to have you just take just a minute to get back to your pair partner here to share that. So something you're taking with you that you'd like to try to put into your life. Okay, when I say go, back to your partner, and you can say goodbye to your best friend now. But just 2 minutes, go. Okay. Back up here. Shh. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Shh. Wonderful. Wow, what a great group for connecting and then disconnecting. It's wonderful. So we have just a minute for a few of you to share with the group something you're taking with you. And we have our microphone folks here. They had already put the microphones away. Ha! Ha! I can't count on professionals like NPR. Oh, that was called an advanced communication skill. It's called public shaming. You come to the next workshop for that. Okay. So thank you, folks. Yeah. Okay. So who'd like to share something you're taking with you? Go for it.
I'll take away the pivot points and when to know to share my point of view, but also know when to step away from a conversation when someone isn't going to listen to me at all.
Very nice. Very nice. Very nice. Thank you for that. Yeah, go for it.
And when we talked, we had the same one, but we're going to try to really take that lesson of separating acknowledgement from perspective. That I feel just looking at how I operate, I try to do them together, and you don't ever get that real acknowledgement before you're, and we're always looking for like places of agreement, but it's almost like you're launching into your own thing without getting that pivot.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, yeah. Just to highlight that, because I didn't highlight it earlier, after you acknowledge, you pause and you let them respond before you give your perspective, because if you just roll through it, so I hear you on cold, but let me tell you, hot is much better. Was I right on that cold? You're cold, I'm hot? Yeah, okay, thank you, thank you. So thank you for underlining that, you pause after that. So somebody else, yeah, go for it.
I'm going to take away pivoting as well. Sometimes when I get into these types of conversations, I won't even share my opinion or share my perspective of things because I fear that it might not be correctly heard or interpreted the way that I want it to be interpreted. So I'm going to take away trying to pivot and trying to have my perspective kind of heard more often.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Somebody, yes.
Yeah, I think something that would definitely be worth taking away is also pivoting for me. But something interesting that my partner talked about was not being too agreeable. So, being able to acknowledge what the other person is saying without, agreeing with them, I think is definitely an important skill and something that I could definitely put into practice because I do feel like I tend to agree too soon. So just taking a step back and like learning, hey, do I actually agree with what they're saying, or am I just saying this to please them?
Yeah, or just being agreeable for its own sake.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. That's very, very perceptive. Over here, yeah.
My partner and I, when we had shared our statements, perspective ones, we had talked about how similar they were, right? We had talked, one was conservative, one was liberal, but overall it was very similar. And we had kind of talked about how when we spend so much time talking about a tertiary, quaternary kind of issue, and you don't ever get to the root, you don't really get to learn, we do agree on these values, but we don't, agree on maybe the best way to fix them or deal with them or kind of whatever. So that's kind of the biggest thing.
Beautiful. Beautiful, absolutely. Yeah, so let me say a couple of things as we finish up, and then there'll be a couple of announcements just to follow up on that. One of the things that I have learned in my 7 years with Braver Angels is the difference between values and aspirations and policies. I think I used to put them together. And so if you disagreed with me on a policy, I assumed you didn't share a value. Policies are means to ends. They're important, and they're worth debate. But if we don't listen to one another and we don't try to get beneath those differences, we can assume we occupy different moral universes. And then how do we talk to each other then? So I want to end with a story that what you said reminds me of. I did a workshop in New Hampshire for state legislators. And one of the exercises was in small groups, half Republican, half Democrat, was this question: what life experiences have influenced your values and beliefs about public policy and public service? What life experiences have influenced your values and beliefs about public policy and public service? And they all knew the question was coming. They all had 5 uninterrupted minutes to share, okay? And I'll never forget, there was a Democrat sitting here who talked about growing up in the foster care system. His father had left the family, his mother had suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, and he and his siblings bounced around the foster care system. And it was a driving influence in his life to make a difference for these kids, and it's part of what made him go into public service in the legislature. He no sooner finished than a Republican sitting here said, "I don't believe this. I grew up in the foster care system." And he told his story. And it was a driving, I get emotional telling it was so stunning. And he told his story about his family and what happened to his family. And it was part of what drove him. He's a conservative who doesn't trust government programs. very much, okay? So he went into the voluntary sector and the faith community sector and labor and job training. So their means were different. The means were different, but the driving force was the same. The driving force was the same. And then somebody, in saying, "What are you taking with you?" shared this line that he said what he took away is, you can't fight somebody in the same way when you know their heart. You can't fight somebody in the same way when you know their heart. You can still fight them, because you have to. I mean, when I say fight, we have to struggle about public policy. But if we connect around heart and values, and we have some skills, maybe we can find a way out of this problem we're in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. I've heard that story a couple times, and I still it makes me feel something for sure. So thank you for sharing that. It was kind of lost on me earlier, and it took me a minute as I was looking at the crowd, but I just want to note, especially to the younger folks in the room who maybe didn't grow up in Rochester, who don't know all of our elected officials, that there are 3 elected officials currently holding office in this room, 2 who are running for office, and 1 who came all the way down from Red Wing and previously represented that area in the state legislature, and I think that's great. They're listening too. I think they understand why people are kind of tired of this, so thank you for coming. Yeah, I mean, if you're one of those people, why don't you just stand up real quick? Go ahead. There we go. Yeah. So a couple of quick housekeeping items. Everyone has a badge. There's a QR code on this badge. We don't want you to leave here and forget this stuff and be like, oh, that was great. What do I do with it now? So in addition to current or future Braver Angels workshops in Rochester, this QR code will take you to a website that has a link to the Braver Angels page and NPR's page. We have a collection page for all of our Talking Sense material, including that online tool that we created with Bill and the Braver Angels folks that helps you practice and think through conversations in advance. It helps you think about what stereotypes you're bringing to the conversation. It helps you consider the type of person that you're talking to. So check it out. The second thing I want to remind you is that our Reverb team is here. Anne is set up in the foyer out there if you want to do our social media video. And again, the question that we asked everyone to consider tonight is, what do you wish people better understood about your community? It's open-ended. You get to define what that community means. If you want to share, that's great. And if you want to see it, you're going to have to follow us online. You can go to nprnews.org. You can check out the NPR News account. And you can also follow the hashtag ReverbNPR on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And that is ReverbNPR. So we hope to join you online. Thank you so much for coming tonight.